You're live and in person, up close and personal.
Yeah, way too up close. All right. So let's bring this meeting of the policy committee to order. Do we have a motion to approve the agenda?
Motion.
Seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, the agenda is approved. Do we have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
Motion.
Seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. The motion passes. So we have in front of us the fiscal restraint policy, which we looked at our last committee meeting. At that point, no one had any objections that I remember to anything substantive about the policy. It was really just simply a matter of trying to move a bit more explanatory text and detail into the policy, since parents and guardians are probably more likely to be looking at the policy than to be looking at the regulations. And that work has been done. So we have a revised version of the fiscal restraint policy. I'm not sure if the one, Sandy, I think the one that you had finalized on the Google Doc is actually slightly different from the one that wound up in our binder, because that looks different. That's the one that we want to approve.
Yep.
So
This is the one, Chair, I had sent earlier. I shared it with you.
yeah,
I couldn't open it up.
Oh,
Yeah, because it said I was rejected. I couldn't do it.
yes.
I would just need to just change the sharing function or whatever on the Google Doc. Yeah, because that's the one we'll actually vote on here, rather than the one that's in the book.
I'll change it for you.
It's all right. And that was for the restraint policy, right?
Yes. And then this one, I didn't see any feedback on this, so I think this one stayed the same. I just wanted to make sure that.
The regulations, I mean, yeah,
Yes.
no, that
That's
was,
so fine, okay.
yeah, that stayed the same. All right, so we don't want to vote until we have that back in the room in a second, the copy of it, but just the procedure going forward. Committee only does one read, so once we vote on it and it's approved, it goes on to the board, and then for the board, there's two reads. When is the next board meeting? It's next Wednesday, is that right, or the one after? The one after, okay. So that would be the first read, and then I think the first meeting after Thanksgiving would be the second week, and it's all set. And I can't imagine there's going to be any great, resistance, questioning, or discussion of it at the board meeting.
Yeah, sorry, it's not colored.
If you want to, you could get my color copy. So I got this thing up. Sure, yeah. I
Trade.
can always- If there's questions, I can look
I
at mine.
guess I handed it to the clerk.
Do you want me to keep it in that form? I forgot what we did last time. Do you want me to keep it in this form with the strikeouts in the red for the board, or do you want me to do it just solid?
No, because this isn't, wait, is this a revision of it is a revision of a previous policy, right?
Yes.
I know board members generally find it really useful to have that information, to know what's been changed about a previous policy.
Sure,
So
so I'll keep it like this.
once it goes through the second read on the, from the board and is passed, I'm assuming all that will follow, then the version that gets formally filed, it would be without all that stuff, right? But for the purposes of the board looking at it, it seems like it should stay. So I'm certainly happy to make a motion to pass it, but I don't know if you have a chance to take a look at the version of it that's here. All that's really been changed, and you can see it in this color version, is that some of the language from the regulations has been moved into the body of the policy, just to clarify it for any parents or guardians who look at it. Because one can imagine, I can easily imagine, being a parent and having a child who's been physically restrained at school. I want to know pretty quickly and easily what all the policies are, when that happens, who does it, what my appeal process is, and all of that. All of that was in the regulations, but it was only sort of vaguely that in the policy. Now it's more explicit.
I actually did outline what if the parent or guardian has a complaint regarding it. It's on page 5.
Mhm.
So I did add that, so that way families would know by looking at the policy what they can do. And we also trained the FACE staff on this also, so that way if they got phone calls, they would know how to respond to parents too and support them.
Only
this is a lot more robust than it was. It was like 2 pages before, right? The only thing I would say in the general belief, I know that we say it maybe on page 3, but who gets to do this? Like the qualifications of the person who's actually doing the training should probably go, like, it's fine that it's on page 3, but it should also go on page 1. Just to be clear that people are trained and, there's a reason why this is happening. And the folks that are doing it are, are authorized to.
Sure, I love that.
Yeah, and that's something that can be added after we've voted on it, so it's not like we have to table it.
I'll just make sure, Shara, that you have the right one, that with that addition, so that we can go up with it.
Okay.
Yeah, that's it.
Okay, so do we have a motion to approve the policy and send it to the board?
Motion to approve the policy and send it to the board. For the first read?
Yes.
For first read. Motion.
Okay, second, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, the motion passes. Thank you very much for all that you've done on this, Sandy. I really appreciate it.
And I will make sure the regulations get sent with this so the board can see both.
Yeah, no, that'd be great. Thank you. Okay, so where are we on the agenda here? So much paper. Okay, so it's just our conversation. That's basically it. So, so the next part of the agenda is really more along the lines of kind of policy planning and conversation. There's nothing to be voted on or anything like that. So we have some new folks in the room, or not new people I don't know who are in the room. So do we want to go around real quick and introduce ourselves? Start with you.
Sure. Hello, everybody. I think I know everyone in the room. I'm Nicole Lonye. I'm the Chief of Equity and Belonging for the district.
I'm James Scott, the Director of Intergovernmental Affairs.
Chiara Cooper, coordinator to the board.
R.O. Sundaresh, Director of Equity and Belonging.
Nettie Garcia, VP of the School Board and Policy Committee member.
Mark Santow, Secretary of the Board and Co-Chair of Policy.
Al Kushner, Board Services Assistant and Clerk to the Board.
Karian Diaz, Title IX and EEO Officer.
I'm Tahisha Fakey, I'm Intern of Office of Equity.
So welcome, and met you guys before, so it's good to have you here. So, I mean, I know you came before the board and kind of laid out just a month or two ago, just kind of all the goals and things that you're going to be up to in the office. So I don't know if we need to do that this time, but what I thought we could do is if there are policies that we have or policies that we do not yet have that would be high priorities for your office, because as we kind of set an agenda for this committee for the rest of the academic year, I want to make sure that we're furthering your work at the same time, and that any new policies we're writing or policies that we're revising are also written with the priorities of your office in mind, including potentially the one we just passed, right? Because for me, for a long time, and I'm not alone in this for sure, revisiting the code of conduct policy in particular is a mission critical thing for us to be doing. It's a culture setter. It's something that we involved the community and spent a lot of time putting together several years ago. And then all the craziness of life in the last few years, I think, may have interfered with implementing it. So and plus we've just learned a lot more about so many things over the last few years. So I'm just wondering what your thoughts are about things that we can do together over the next couple of months, and what your policy priorities are in your office.
So first of all, I'm not sure who did this, but there's a beautiful document. I think we had an intern a few years ago, maybe recently, who took all of the policies, put them in one place, and then prioritized them.
Yes,
So that was like super helpful.
Yeah.
So we actually met as a team, and by the way, the team is now, perhaps I think this is their 14th day on the job. I think, maybe a little less. But we've hit the ground running because there's no time. There's a lot to be done. And as you said, if you're talking about really creating an equity lens for this district in all phases of the district, the work has to start. You know, we can't complain about the fact that we started late. We gotta keep moving. So we've been doing quite a few things. I gave the new team 5 days to get acclimated, and when we began, we actually looked at that document and highlighted. If you go into the document, you'll see that the policies that we prioritize are highlighted in a pretty navy blue. Particularly the code of conduct is very important. As soon as I met with Sandy, she has a plan. She had already taken responsibility and lead on that. So I'll be supporting her with that. And we've talked quite a bit since I've been here around how we can do that. I actually met with John Gallo today about some of the pieces around sort of a restorative center, a place for students to go get support and then be reintegrated back into the school so that they're not out forever. And so I shared with him Boston Public Schools Code of Conduct and told him to take a look at it because I think it's pretty good. He's looked at Maryland's as well. I think BPS is something that, first of all, Boston, I love using Boston because they're right next door, right? Very similar to us, but I think their code of conduct is, when you read it at the very start, it's very restorative in nature. And, you know, there's still clear consequences and, you know, mention of different legalese, but it begins in a way that really clearly shows that the district is interested in really supporting students and finding the best place for them. And so I think the way it starts off sets a really good tone. So he said he would take a look at it as part of the preparation for that. We've been focusing on the racial equity policy for obvious reasons. We actually spent I want to say 4 or 5 hours on Monday just going through. And what we really did was we kind of blew it up rather than looking at it side by side and wordsmithing. We just said, okay, what do we think based on research that we all come to the table with? So we have almost a comprehensive, fully executed draft. However, what we want to do, part of that policy says there should be an equity leadership team. And so what we want to do is put a call up for volunteers to serve on that team. I've got a few people who've already reached out. I think a couple of us do. And one of the things I'd like them to do is look at the draft themselves and have an opportunity to talk about it, look at the original, and ask questions and provide their expertise before we actually bring it to the policy committee. Getting some students, some parents, maybe a couple of teachers, administrators, some community folks, maybe probably not more than 10, to come together to really go through it and make sure that it's clear to them, make sure that there are not things that we're missing before we bring it to the policy committee. So that's something that we're planning to do before we go off for Christmas break or winter break. The other thing we're looking at, Karian is our Title IX coordinator or officer, and she's also the EO person now. And we don't have a set of standard operating procedures for Title IX. So she has been working diligently with the team, including Charlie, Aubrey, lots of different people, Isaiah Gill, et cetera, to make sure that what she's come up with addresses our needs as a district. So she has been able to put together a really strong draft. She met with Audrey with Barno this morning to go through it and to get some more information to make sure that it was a solid plan. Arab is working on a piece that has been really important for our district around pronouns. How do schools, what's the process at schools, what's the policy, how do we support students and families? So he's come up with a really strong draft as well that we're going to share with some of the same folks, some students and teachers, central office cabinet, to make sure that it's clear, our guidance supervisor, because we want to make sure that when it goes out that we also offer training and support and that it's very clear what happens with students at the school level. And students also need to know where they can go and what they need to do when they're in school, because part of the problem is kids don't know what to do. They don't know who to talk to, they don't know what the process is, and in many cases, they don't know their rights. So that's been kind of a big work that's been happening in the last, I want to say, 8 days or so. On top of that, we have quite a bit of professional development that's scheduled, starting tomorrow with principals. Then we have a student leadership conference, a full day, 60 students coming up in November. And then we have Dr. Goldie Muhammad coming on November 30th on a virtual conference for teachers, but it's going to be open to the community as well. We'll be sending out the advertisement and flyers for that as well. And that's also, that's not going to, of course, solve all the problems we have right now, but it's a way to start to kind of lay the foundational work around what this office is about, what the expectations are, and also help when those policies are finalized through the process to get as many voices as possible to be able to support the policy. I think part of the problem with us sometimes is we create policies that nobody understands. And the whole purpose, the policy should be, to us, written in a way that the public, particularly parents, can read it and understand what it means, and what it means for them in their place, and how they can use that to support their students. So that's where we are in a quick overview.
It's a busy couple of weeks, much than just the last 14 days or so. So it sounds like you have a really good process in mind for the development of a lot of these different policies, and that's one of the things we've been kind of wondering about with the code of conduct is, I mean, there's the policy itself, policy making, wordsmithing, all that, but I remember, and correct me if you have a different impression of it, but I remember when we created this policy, we had a pretty inclusive community process to create it. And it was really, really valuable for that. I mean, like a lot of documents that are created by a lot of different constituencies are using lags. It's, as big as it is, both because it's a complex issue, but also because there were a lot of, cooks in the kitchen. But democracy involves lots of cooks in the kitchen, so that's how it should be. But what I'm wondering is, do you have any thoughts about a process, an equally inclusive or similarly inclusive process that we could put together to kind of revisit the student conduct?
I mean, I would, Sandy's not here, but she's a very inclusive person. I would be surprised if she doesn't, I don't want to speak for her, but I would be surprised if she doesn't already have that in her plan. But we're going to be working together on that, and I don't think we can, I think there are some policies, depending on what it is, that can be done internally without a lot of necessary community input. I don't think the student code of conduct is one of them. We need a lot of input in that. And I don't mean like 20 or 30 people, but a process where maybe you have a few people who have a lens, maybe have some open forums, just kind of talk about it and get parents to take a look at it and ask questions. We have quite a few student leadership groups. Some of them are right across the street, right? Yeah. Inviting some of them to come in and say, hey, here's what we're coming up with. What are your thoughts? Are we missing anything? We went to Classical a couple of weeks ago. They had a teach-in that was fabulous. And it was focused on social media responsibilities and
Student rights.
Students' rights. So that was the one that was intriguing to me. And they did like a crazy, amazing job. You would not have believed that they were high school students. But they're very, very engaged and interested in this work. I mean, that's just one school. I know when I was in Stewart, there were a group of kids there that were very interested also. So I think getting students to be able to also have some input in the revisions. But I also think giving people a model of what it could be is important too. I think, like you said, things have changed. We have to figure out a way to stop having this revolving door of students going from one school to another, especially without some kind of really strong intervention. So if a student, sometimes people do need to be relocated. Sometimes I believe teachers need to be, maybe they're not in the right setting, but they need to be in a different place, right? But when they get there, what happens that's different to help support them, right? So that's all, those are some of the major pieces we really need to look at in the student code of conduct. Not just, what some may say are punitive consequences, but how do we support students so we don't get there? And then what do we need to have in place? So if we want to have intervention centers, in Boston, they call them student planning centers. Students go there, they get intense services, social emotional services, they get tutorial, they take tests to see where they can actually maybe push through a course. Sometimes, we're not a mastery-based district, so sometimes students fail courses not because they don't understand the content, because they didn't even go to class, or they were kicked out of class because they were acting up or whatever. So really kind of doing a diagnostic with students to try to figure out where they are and then giving them those services and then sending them back to their schools a little stronger with a set of skills. So those are some of the things I think that are not necessarily strongly written out in our current code of conduct that I think has a lot of opportunity for the update.
Yeah, and some, I think the MTSS policy kind of overlaps with some of that.
Absolutely.
Is there, I mean, I can probably look it up, but James or Al or Shara, whomever, you had mentioned the Boston Public Schools Code of Conduct. Is that something that we can see a copy of?
I'll dig it up while you talk.
I have it. I can forward to you right now.
Okay, when you talk.
Oh, well, I'm talking, so you can. 2016 version.
Because it's, I mean, particularly for someone who is essentially a novice, a volunteer, it's very useful for me to be able to see best practices rather than just the one practice, which is.
So 2016, that's older than ours.
That's actually.
It's very, which I thought was interesting. When I was reading it, I thought it was like, when I was reading it, I thought it was much newer, but when I took the date, it's 2016. But it's to me, it's a little bit more progressive.
February 2016.
I'll
send it along.
So I guess the other question about, well, there's many other questions, but one that leaps to mind anyway is one that actually leapt to mind with ours, which is, policy is only as good as sort of the implementation, data collection, and accountability, sort of closing the loop to make sure people are doing the work, people are trained to do the work, that they're held accountable to do the work. And, I felt like when we did, I was very proud of this policy when we passed it, but I felt like it didn't quite do that. And I'd be curious to know whether the Boston one has come closer to solving that problem than we have. In other words, is their district actually in real life on a day-to-day basis moving towards restorative justice as opposed to?
Well, Carillon has actually been meeting with them.
Oh,
The
great.
work is all overlapping, so I don't know if you want to share a little bit about what.
Yeah, and I know Arav met with them as well, but I think probably similarly, they just have a lot of people. And so they have a lot of folks. And Denisha worked for them too. So you could probably share some experiences as well. But today I met with my equivalent at BPS. And she just talked through all the systems and practices that they have. And so it's just really helpful to kind of see how their process works and what best practices they've used. Arav, I don't know if you want to share a little bit about what you talked about with them as well.
Yeah, and similarly, what you just said about policies one thing, implementation, and assessment is another thing. That for me has felt very notable with the trans and gender expansive non-discrimination policy. A lot of families and students don't know that exists or what their rights are therein, and so that led to developing some procedures for some of the most basic things like affirming name and, as Dr. Lee said, the pronoun sort of aspect of it all. But for a lot of folks, that's it's basic. And there's more, right? Then there's just learning to exist together and learn from each other. So BPS though has a really nice example of those kind of that process. That's very human. That's not just about checking off boxes, but about actually having conversation and making sure that the kid is affirmed. So it's good to have friends close by. I mean, professional friends, we don't know them personally, but to have those connections for sure.
Yeah, because that's been, I mean, just from my own personal knowledge, that's been the piece that's missing. I know, since 2017, but certainly before that there are comparable urban districts that are doing this work, so that there has to be enough out there, whether it's in the literature or in professional connections or both, where we can jump in front. I don't care whether we're in front or not, but jump in front for the right reasons.
Absolutely. I think you have to get into the practice of not just creating and passing policy, but then doing the next step
Yeah.
right away.
Mhm.
And I don't think that has always happened. Because I agree with you. I know what went into the current student code of conduct. A lot went in there, a lot of input. But some of the things that if you read some of the structures and supports that's supposed to happen, they haven't all materialized, right? And a lot of it has to do with, well, who's going to manage that? Was there a conversation? Does the structure exist? Is it even possible? Is it feasible? Can we afford it? So one of the things we've been doing as we've been putting the draft together for this equity racial policy, race ethnicity policy, is not just looking at the what, but looking at the how. So we're almost doing a dual process. As we're writing, I know I'm keeping track of, okay, what does this mean for the principal, what does it mean for the teacher? So the process piece, the implementation piece at the school level is really important. So I think you almost have to, my brain works like that anyway. I'm always thinking about process. So if we're writing some things and it sounds great and no one says, well, is this even something that's feasible? Could we do this? I don't think it's a bad thing to ask that question. I don't think the answer should hold us back if we think it's the right thing to do. Because if we think it's the right thing to do, then we say, you know what, right now we can, but we know this is really important. So we're going to put it here, but we have to make sure that we follow through and start the steps to make sure we can do this. I just think that's what we need to do more of as we're doing this. And I think that's something when we did this code of conduct would be really important because we were all calling Boston for different reasons. It wasn't about the student code of conduct, but it's all the same. It's very much connected, right? So if you have that racial ethnicity policy in place, and you have Title IX in place, well, that all really feeds into your student code of conduct and what happens with students there as well. So even though they're separate policies, they actually have to work together. And so it was ironic that everybody, and then I pulled up Boston Public Schools and I said, did you guys see this? And they were like, yeah, we just got off the phone at several different times. So great minds.
And just the student playing centers that Nicole was talking about, they start on page 18 of the Boston document.
So I have several comments. One, back in 2017, it took a while for us to get the current iteration of the student code of conduct together.
Right.
And then unfortunately, we had lots of shifts after that in leadership and, the pandemic, we didn't have kids in school for about a year and a half, right? Normal school day. So now is a perfect time to revisit this, to revisit it with robust community input. I love the fact that you're looking at other districts and another district, but also rely on the Council of Great City Schools because we pay for that membership, and I don't know how much this district is actually reaching back to that network to see, better practices. Because, not for nothing, Boston also has their own problems. Like,
Oh, that's true. That's true.
like, sure, they are, next door and everything else, but there are some things that they're doing right and some things that they're obviously also struggling with, just as we are, especially after the pandemic and post this past administration that we've had in DC. So there's that. So community input, super important. People are going to want to be a part of this. And I feel like you and how you go about things, you're already going to think about all the folks that are not sitting at the table to be a part of these conversations. Consider, I don't think we have one. I think that there's certain student groups and certain parent groups that are thinking about this, but I don't think we have a student bill of rights or a parent bill of rights.
And the TSU is working on
They are.
student bill of rights.
And it's really good.
Yeah.
And it was on our radar in our policy planning document somewhere as something to work on. And I think there was a bit of a chicken and egg thing that we were sort of waiting to see what students came up with.
Yeah.
Because we want to do that. And I think Charter's trying to come up with something that's more legal sounding. But That seems really important for us.
Yeah, so in addition to the policy and in addition to, you know, how we're going to implement all of this thing, what is that, you know, more accessible 2 to 3 pager
Right.
that can go to families and students so that they understand what that means,
Exactly.
in actuality to them.
Exactly. What I love about, when you look at I'm with you 100%, there's no utopia. What I loved about their policy was that you brought that up, is that they actually start off with students' rights and responsibilities.
That's just-
And they talk about administrative responsibilities. They talk about parents' rights and responsibilities before they even get into anything about suspensions and all of that. That's the first thing you see. And I thought, I was like, wow, this is cool. And then I thought about the presentation we just saw at Possible. That one on students' rights was really phenomenal. I mean, they did their research.
They've
Really
been
strong.
working on that for years, so they.
And it was in their language. I think one thing with adults is we always kind of put everything in our language. It's not for us, it's their rights, so it should be, to me, in the language that they understand. And that's how they present it. And we're leveraging, for the student conference on the 16th, we're leveraging 6 of them that we saw who facilitated that. They're gonna be facilitating at the student conference on the 16th. So, I mean, so we have people that are ready to mobilize, there's no doubt about that. Students want to be involved, and we just have to create an opportunity for that to happen. So I know Sandy has a lot on her plate, but we've talked, and she has a timeline that she's gonna get started. I've met with John, we wanna partner on this, and we will partner on this. But without a doubt, we have to have different voices to play into the student code of conduct, to make sure that what we're saying, first of all, to make sure that what we're saying we want to do is the right thing, number one, but number two, to hold us accountable. We have to be held accountable to make sure that we implement what we say we're going to implement. So like the student planning centers, I loved it. When I read the way they presented it in their policy, the first thing I said was, I wonder if it's really working. And then I spoke to Garian later on in the afternoon. She said, oh yeah, this is what they're doing. But they have a system, and they also have people who are dedicated to that work.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't have one center. They have several of them. It's a bigger, larger district. So, and I actually debriefed with John right afterwards. So he said he was going to go take a look, because I wanted him to have a mental model of what this could look like. And then also take a look at, like I said, he said he's looking at Baltimore as well. The new chief talent officer came from the DC area, so he's another person that has some context too of how things can be done differently as well. But whatever the decision is, and this is a science brain part of me, I'm always thinking about implementation. If we say we're gonna do it, then we need to implement it. So what does that mean? What does it mean in human capital? What does that mean in terms of costs, space, right? Everything, so that we can, and then what's the timeline to get it settled? Because that student planning center, whatever we decide to call it, is crucial. It's a crucial piece of the student code of conduct, because we're saying that if students, for whatever reason, need to be away for a minute, then this is where they're going to go. Well, who's going to be there to receive them? How is that going to be different? How is that going to be supportive? What resources will be available there? What will the student experience be? What will the parent experience be? Like, we have to answer all of those so that there is a system, and when the students get there, everything happens the way it's supposed to happen. That's just one piece, but just an example. 611. Oh, 611, yeah. I mean, I can give you a few more minutes.
And just one more,
Sure.
and this is more for the superintendent, and we have a meeting with him tomorrow, I hope, that we can keep it, is the fact that, the policy committee as it exists right now for the board, can't do anything without full support of the district, which we have struggled with over the last couple of years. And right now, we have staff in place, but they themselves need support because they're not policy writers, necessarily, or at all. So we need the full support of the superintendent and his cabinet to take a look at that document that you said is so well organized. Take the pieces that belong to the various departments and come back to the committee in a more proactive approach, rather than, we're out of compliance and we need this done yesterday, and we're doing it, in a fast, rushed, reactive way rather than in an intentional way, in a thoughtful way, which is where we have been for a little while. So yeah, I'm glad that you're here. I'm glad that Sandy's here, and we need more members of the cabinet to come in here and say, hey, I take ownership over this, and we as a cabinet are going to talk to each other and make sure that it all makes sense in the ways that they may overlap. The policies and procedures may overlap.
Absolutely. And we can also, one of the things where, that I hear in our cabinet meetings all the time, everybody does the best they can. One thing I'm excited about this time around for me is that there's a lot of discussion about collaboration, but then people are actually collaborating. So we're always, Sandy's office is right next to mine. So either she's in my office, I'm in her office. They just came on board. We're all talking and understanding that a lot of it is overlap. So I think part of the problem is people get overwhelmed is when you look at some of those policies, you're like, oh my God, where do I start? But if you know that you're not by yourself and that you have a team of people, the team doesn't have to belong to your department. The bottom line is we're all there to do the work. So whoever has the opportunity to do it, we get together and make it happen. I mean, that's my philosophy. That seems to be the philosophy of many people here now. So I'm very super hopeful. And then we want to make sure too that, so there's a sexual violence policy that was marked as high a priority. So that's another one that we're going to be focused on. So what we have to do is just like what we did on Monday, we just shut everything off and we just focus on this and let's just try to get a draft done so that when we meet with people, we can say, well, here's what we came up with, here's the original, have at it, as opposed to, because when you invite people to come, they also don't want to do that deep work. They want to have something to work from. So we're going to try to do the same thing using that prioritized spreadsheet. Like I said, we have several of them highlighted that are specific to this department, but we'll also be collaborating with our colleagues in other departments to support the work.
Well, that's great, and that's, as soon as this committee meets every month, can meet more frequently, if we need to, we'll be having conversations about changing our meeting schedule back to what it was pre everything.
What was that?
We met more frequently.
Okay.
We're going to be working on our bylaws to try and meet more frequently. So, as you and your collaborators come up with drafts of policies, and then we'll be here ready to help as best we can.
Well, we hope to bring the equity policy to you. I don't know if it'll be before Christmas because I'll be before winter break, because I really want to make sure that we have at least a partial team together, an equity team, some students, parents, community members, to take a look at it before we bring it to the committee, so that we can at least say, here's what we did, here are other people that worked on this, here's what we have to present, and then at least you have an idea of all the different entities that have had a chance to take into it. If that's okay with you.
Yeah, right. That's wonderful. That would be great.
So if not before winter break, we're meeting right after winter break, we would be able to come forward, because we're going to put this team together. People have been waiting. I just have left them at bay because I don't like to bring people together for no reason. Now that we have a team in place and we've talked, we've met, we have our priorities set, now I can say this is why you're coming together. And in the next year or so, here are the things we're going to be working on, because we have to also do an equity action plan for the district. There's so many things, a larger equity audit. We have to take a look at the existing one. So there's so much to do. So there's plenty of work to do. We just wanted to make sure that it's tempered, scheduled in a way that's coherent and makes sense as well.
I think we are, I know you don't, so I'll say this.
Go ahead.
So this committee is going to be, I hope, looking at the MTSS policy and grading policy within the next.
I believe we're on track for the December meeting, so it sounds, it's like it's a sequel we've been waiting for, I guess, but all indications it's going to be on the docket for your December policy meeting, then first read the following school board, hopefully. And then the meeting for tomorrow is confirmed, so it is on the calendar, there's no conflicts.
And with, I know I said this in an email, but with regard to those two policies especially, they're both kind of complex, mission critical policies, so the sooner committee members can see the drafts prior to the meeting, the better, which just means we have to kind of work backwards.
Yeah, it's definitely, I've had toes in the process a little bit. There's a lot of people in there, looking at different parts. It's definitely, I think what you're going to see, hopefully get well advanced and be a pretty improved product over what it was.
And I guess just another process question. There's so many of our policies, including those two, but especially MTSS, that need to be sort of filtered through an equity lens in order to be what we want them to be as planned. At the same time, you have to, and people in your office have to like sleep and live your lives. So I'm just kind of curious. Maybe we save this for another conversation because I don't want you to leave because I know you need to leave.
That's okay, it's okay.
I'm wondering how. I mean, I know you tagged some of them on the policy planning thing. So if a policy comes to us, like say the MTSS one, which I think was 5-6 weeks. Will your office have participated in the drafting of that policy or had eyes on it before it gets to us? Or do we want to ask you perhaps to come and help us talk through it with an equity lens to make sure it is what we want it to be? I'm wondering what the best thing is.
So you can always invite me. I'm always happy to come. But yes, my eyes will be on it before it comes to you. I actually we met already. And I was present, I think the weeks of learning thing. Maybe last week we met, maybe the week before, Julie convened a bunch of us together to look at that. We had a very long, rich discussion around that. I haven't seen the drafts that came out of that, but I'm sure she'll be sending that back out to us. What I've noticed, I was just sharing this with Karian and Denasia earlier, people are starting to get it around this whole equity thing, which is helpful because I think when you read a lot of the research around equity teams and organizations, people talk about being lonely, people, it not really being taken seriously. That's actually far from my experience this year. People are taking it very seriously. I think the challenge for me is to make sure that we stay focused on our priorities because otherwise you can end up going so many different ways. But when it comes to policies, definitely the Office of Equity has to take a look at those. And I prefer to look at them way before we have the conversations and explain and communicate. It could be all three of us or a combination of us before we get to you. But if you want to make it a practice that when you're looking at policies and I'm at the table, I'm happy to do that if I have to. That's not a problem. But people are engaging me and members of the team, which brings me a lot of joy because that means they really are taking this very seriously.
Well, I mean, it's or should be a unifying principle.
That's true.
It's a mission critical.
It can be kind of scary sometimes, though.
That's good scary.
I recognize my scariness. I own it. I own it. So, but no, it's been so far, knock on wood, it's been a very good experience. People are really reaching out and they're grateful and thankful for the work that we're doing. And they actually are saying, I need an equity lens on this. I need you to look at this. I need to make sure. The superintendent says it all the time. So.
That's great. I don't think that's where we were when I got here.
Oh,
That's good.
There are, I know contrary to popular belief, there have been some steps forward. I just think that we have so many challenges sometimes we forget to look and see all of the things that are changing for the better. So we still need a lot of work, but there's a lot of change. And I feel like people are taking our work very seriously.
I think that part of the board's job is also to share the good news outside this building with regard to these sorts of things.
Follow me on Twitter.
Thank you so much to you and all of your colleagues for coming. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So anything else we need to, I'm sure there's things you and I can talk about, but I don't think there's anything else the committee needs to. So, including talking about when our next meetings will be, we have to talk about that because we have some backwards planning to do for a possible retreat and an organizational meeting. The meetings you were talking about organizing with the community and all that, but we don't need to talk about that here, I think. So, do we have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Motion is seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes. We are adjourned. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Dr. Mary, I don't know if you checked on any of the CTE cluster nights though, but they're doing it 21 and just tomorrow with the biodiversity cluster.
Okay. Is there, I mean, I know this is, I don't know whether to direct this question to you or not,